I was standing at the kitchen counter, pouring my second coffee of the morning, when my phone lit up on the counter beside me. It was a text from my notary. 3 words, all capitals, stop. Don't srint. Cite Lamog down. My hand was already reaching for my coat. I had an appointment in 40 minutes. The final paperwork to transfer the family home into my name, exactly the way my father had written it in his will. I'd been waiting 8 months for this day. 8 months of grief, of paperwork, of my brother telling me everything was being handled. I stared at the screen. Then my phone rang. Rachel, it was Mr. Okafor, the notary my father had used for 30 years. His voice was measured, careful. The way someone speaks when they're choosing every word. I need you to come to my office before you go anywhere else today. There's something in the file I found last night that you need to see. Do not go to that appointment this morning. What is it? I asked. What's in the file? He paused for a moment. I'll explain everything when you get here. Just come to me first. I called my brother Daniel on the way out. It went straight to voicemail. I called his wife, Lisa. Same thing. I stood in the doorway of the house I'd grown up in, the one my father had left me, and I thought about the past 8 months. All the times Daniel had said he was taking care of things. All the times Lisa had offered to help me navigate the paperwork. All the times I'd thanked them. I got in my car and drove to Mr. Okafor's office. My name is Rachel. I'm 32 years old. I work as a bookkeeper for a small construction company in Kitchener, Ontario. My father passed away 14 months ago after a long illness, and he left behind a paid-off house on Elgin Street, a modest RRSP, and a savings account at TD Bank that he'd been building for 20 years. He wasn't wealthy by any stretch, but what he left was his, and he'd been very specific about what he wanted done with it. He wanted the house to go to me. He wanted his RRSP split equally between me and Daniel. He wanted his savings, just under $90,000, divided the same way. I knew this because he told me more than once, and because I had been there in the same notary's office when my father signed the documents 4 years before he died. I was 28. Daniel was 35. My father was 66 and healthy then, sharp as he'd always been. He shook Mr. Marsain, Okafor's hand, signed every page, and on the drive home he said to me, I just want to make sure you're taken care of, kiddo. Daniel's got Lisa and the boys. You're still figuring things out. The house is yours. I remembered thinking that was the most quietly loving thing he'd ever said to me. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that 3 years later, when my father's health began to fail, when the early-stage dementia made his signature shaky and his memory unreliable, someone would take advantage of that. Mr. Okafor had his glasses on when I arrived. He was sitting at his desk with a manila folder open in front of him and a look on his face. I didn't know how to read. He stood up when I came in, which he never does, and he gestured to the chair across from him. Sit down, Rachel. I sat. He slid a document across the desk toward me. This came through my office 6 weeks ago. It was submitted as an amendment to your father's original estate plan. I processed it without flagging it because the signature appeared valid and it came through proper channels. But last night, I was cross-referencing the file in preparation for today's transfer, and I found something that made me stop. I looked at the document. It was titled Codicil to Last Will and Testament. James Arthur Holloway. My father's name. I scanned the page. My eyes found the key line almost immediately. It amended the disposition of the family property at Elgin Street. Instead of transferring to Rachel Marie Holloway, it now transferred to Daniel James Holloway and his spouse, Lisa Ann Holloway, in joint tenancy. My chest went cold. When was this signed? I asked. My voice came out very quiet. 8 months ago. Mr. Okafor folded his hands. Your father was in Sunview memory care by then. He had been assessed at a moderate stage of cognitive decline. What I should have caught, what I'm deeply sorry I did not catch, is that a codicil of this nature, signed by a person at that stage of assessment, would require a formal capacity evaluation by a physician before any notary should have processed it. But you didn't process it. No. A notary in Guelph processed it, someone your brother apparently went to separately. He paused. Rachel, there's more. He slid a second sheet across. It was a bank form. A designation of beneficiary update for the RRSP. My father's RRSP. My father's RRSP. It now listed Daniel as the sole beneficiary. Then a third sheet. A joint account application. The TD savings account. the one with $90,000, had been converted to a joint account with right of survivorship, adding Daniel's name, signed 6 weeks before my father died. I sat with all 3 documents in front of me, and I didn't say anything for a long time. The signatures on these documents, Mr. Okafor said carefully, are consistent with your father's handwriting from that late period of his illness. But the question of whether he had the legal capacity to understand what he was signing, that is a different question entirely. I drove home in a kind of silence I had never felt before. Not the quiet kind, the kind that fills up your whole chest. I thought about the last year of my father's life. I thought about how Daniel had stepped in so decisively when the diagnosis came, how he'd arranged the move to Sunview, how he'd offered to handle the banking so I wouldn't have to worry. How Lisa had sat with me at the kitchen table one afternoon and said, gently, that maybe it would be easier if Daniel managed the estate administration since he had more bandwidth right now. I had been grateful. I had actually thanked her. I thought about the visits I'd made to Sunview, how there were stretches where my father recognized me perfectly, and we'd sit by the window and he'd tell me stories about when he was young. And there were other times when he'd look at me with a kind of sweet confusion and call me by my mother's name. She'd been gone since I was 12. I thought about the Sunday afternoon 3 months before he died when I came in, and he grabbed my hand very tightly and said, Rachel, I need you to make sure the house stays yours. I told Danny already, the house is yours. And I'd said, I know, Dad, it's okay. I thought he was confused, tangled in an old worry. I didn't know he might have been trying to warn me. When I got home, I called my best friend, Priya, who works as a paralegal at a firm in Waterloo. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is not something Priya normally does. When I finished, she said, okay, here's what you're going to do. The next 6 weeks were the hardest of my life, and also the most clarifying. Priya connected me with an estates litigation lawyer named Miss Chen. On our first call, she told me 3 things. First, that what I was describing, if it could be proven, fell under undue influence and potential fraud. Second, that the legal capacity standard for signing a codicil or changing a beneficiary designation is not the same as general dementia diagnosis, but that a moderate stage assessment at Sunview, combined with no independent capacity evaluation, was a significant red flag that a court would likely scrutinize. Third, that I needed to stop talking to my brother entirely and let her handle all communication. I hadn't spoken to Daniel since before I went to Mr. Okafor's office. He'd called me 4 times in the 2 days after. I let all of them go to voicemail. His messages started confused and ended defensive. The first thing Miss Chen did was send a formal request to Sunview Memory Care for my father's full clinical records, every assessment, every notation, every visit log for the 18 months before he died. Under FIPA in Ontario, she was entitled to request these as part of estate litigation proceedings. What came back was 140 pages. I sat with Miss Chen in her office on a Friday afternoon while she walked me through the key notations. My father had been assessed a moderate cognitive impairment, which is defined in part as significant decline in memory, language, and executive function, 8 months before he died. The same month, the codicil was signed. The assessment specifically noted that he required prompting and support for all financial decision-making. There was also something else in the records, something I hadn't known and didn't expect. The visitor logs from Sunview showed that in the 4-week period immediately before those documents were signed, I had not visited my father. Except I had. I know I had. I had visited him every single Sunday for the entire last 2 years of his life. It was not something I missed. It was the most important thing I did every week. I told Miss Chen this. She looked at me steadily and asked if I had anything that could corroborate those visits. I thought for a moment. Then I remembered something. My father's room at Sunview was on the 2nd floor, east wing. The entrance was through a keypad door, and every visitor had to sign in at the front desk. But there was also, because my father liked to sit by the window and watch the parking lot, which he found calming, a habit I had developed of texting Priya when I arrived and when I left, just to check in because Priya worried about me making that drive alone in winter. I opened my phone. I scrolled back, and there they were, 53 separate text messages to Priya, time-stamped, on 53 separate Sundays, saying some version of here, see you after. The visit logs had been altered. Miss Chen didn't use that word right away. She said there was a discrepancy that would need to be investigated, but she said it in a way that meant we both understood what we were looking at. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because I think people imagine you feel rage or vindication or some clean, powerful emotion. What I actually felt was a grief so deep it had no bottom. Because this wasn't a stranger who had done this. This was my brother who I had called from the hospital when our father was first diagnosed, who I had sat next to at our father's funeral, who I had hugged at the reception afterward while Lisa brought me a cup of tea and said, "We're going to get through this together." The investigation that Ms. Chen initiated over the following months was quiet and methodical, and I was not always told everything as it was happening, which she said was intentional. She didn't want me to do anything that could be seen as interference. What eventually came to light through the proceedings, through document forensics, through Sunview's security footage, through the testimony of 2 staff members who had worked on my father's floor, was a picture that I still have trouble looking at directly. The visit logs had been altered on a shared digital system that Sunview used. The alterations were made by a user account that had been added to the system 6 months before my father died, added under a volunteer coordinator designation that was never actually filled. The account was traced to an IP address registered to Daniel and Lisa's home in Cambridge. The codicil had been signed during a visit when my father's assigned PSW was on her break and the nursing station was short-staffed. A staff member recalled seeing a man she later identified as Daniel helping my father with some papers at the small table in his room. She had assumed it was insurance forms. She had not thought to intervene. The Guelph notary who processed the codicil told investigators he had received a call from a man identifying himself as my father's physician, confirming capacity. He had not called back to verify. He had not seen my father in person. He had processed the document remotely. He subsequently surrendered his notarial commission. Daniel's lawyer argued throughout the proceedings that my father had been lucid on the day he signed, that the codicil reflected a genuine change of intention, and that I was a difficult and absent daughter who had neglected my father during his illness. That last part, I think, was the part designed to hurt me most. And for a long time, it worked. I spent several weeks cycling through the question in the middle of the night. Had I done enough? Had I been there enough? Had I somehow missed something I should have caught? It took Priya sitting me down with a cup of tea and 53 text messages to bring me back to solid ground. "You were there," she said. "Every single Sunday. The records lie. You don't." The civil proceeding concluded 14 months after I walked into Mr. Okafor's office that morning. The Ontario Superior Court of Justice found that the codicil to my father's will was invalid, having been executed without a proper capacity assessment as required under the Substitute Decisions Act, and having been obtained under circumstances consistent with undue influence. The codicil was set aside. The original will was reinstated in full. The RRSP beneficiary change was similarly found to be invalid and was reversed. The joint account designation on the TD savings account was set aside. The estate was distributed as my father had originally intended, the house to me. The financial assets split equally as he had written. The Ontario RCMP's Financial Crimes Unit opened a separate criminal investigation based on the evidence that had surfaced during the civil proceedings. I was not a party to that process. I was a witness. I gave a statement. I answered every question I was asked. Daniel was charged with fraud over $5,000 and with causing a forged document to be used. His wife, Lisa, was charged as a party to the offense. The trial is scheduled for later this year. I won't say more than that. What I will say is this. There is a specific, particular cruelty in what they did that goes beyond the money. It is the cruelty of using my father's vulnerability, his confusion, his fear, his love for the people around him as the instrument of it. He was a man who spent his whole working life as a machinist in a plant outside of Brantford, who drove a 15-year-old truck because it still runs fine, who saved for 30 years so that the things he'd worked for wouldn't just disappear. He did not deserve to have the last months of his life be the mechanism through which someone he trusted stole from his own child. I moved into the house on Elgin Street in February. I repainted the hallway the same color it was when I was growing up. A sort of dusty sage green that my mother had chosen, that my father had never changed because he liked it. I found his old coffee mug in the back of the cupboard, the one that says, "World's Okayest Fisherman," that I'd bought him as a joke when I was 17, and I have been using it every single morning since. Mr. Okafor called me after the judgment came through. He said he was glad he had looked at the file one more time before the transfer went through. He said he should have caught it sooner and that he was sorry. I told him that the fact that he caught it at all is the reason I have this house, and that I meant that. I think about that text message sometimes. Stop. Don't shite. 3 words. If it had come 20 minutes later, or if I'd been in the shower, or if I'd already been on the highway, the transfer would have gone through. The house would have gone through Daniel and Lisa, and I would have had no idea for a very long time that there was anything to question. My father used to say that the truth has a way of being patient, that it will wait as long as it needs to wait, and then it will walk straight through the door. I didn't fully understand what he meant when I was younger. I think I do now. If you are in a situation where a family member is ill and others are helping to manage their affairs, please pay attention. Ask for copies of documents. Verify signatures with professionals you trust independently. Check the visitor logs at care facilities and keep your own records, timestamps, texts, photos. Cognitive decline does not strip a person of their dignity or their intentions, but it can make them vulnerable to the people who are supposed to protect them. I almost lost everything my father worked for because I trusted the wrong people and didn't ask enough questions. The notary my father had used for 30 years asked one extra question on a Thursday night, and that changed everything. The house is mine. The mug is mine. The dusty sage hallway is mine. And that okay's fisherman is still somewhere in every room. I used to think that the hardest part of losing a parent was the grief itself. The empty chair at the table, the voicemails you can't bring yourself to delete. But I learned something I didn't expect in the 14 months after my father died. That the grief can be compounded, quietly and deliberately, by the people who are supposed to share it with you. What happened to me wasn't random. It was a sequence of choices, each one calculated, each one building on the one before it. My brother didn't wake up one morning and decide to steal. He built it slowly, over months, using my father's confusion as the foundation and my trust as the door he walked through. And that is the part I keep coming back to, not because I want to assign blame forever, but because I think it matters to understand how these things actually happen. They don't happen in one dramatic moment. They happen in small surrenders of attention, in "I'll handle it," and "don't worry about that," in the relief you feel when someone else takes the difficult thing off your plate. I was not naive. I was grieving. There is a difference, and I think it's important to name that. Grief makes you want to hand things to people you trust. It makes the administrative weight of loss feel unbearable, and when someone offers to carry it, you let them. What I didn't have, what I wish I'd had, was the understanding that trust should be proportional to verification, not because the people around you are suspects, but because the people who love you should be able to withstand scrutiny. If my brother had nothing to hide, checking the documents myself would have cost nothing. Because I didn't check, it nearly cost everything. The thing that saved me was not luck, exactly. It was a man who had known my father for 30 years, who took 30 extra minutes on a Thursday night to cross-reference a file before a transfer went through. That kind of care, methodical, unglamorous, entirely undramatic, is what integrity actually looks like in practice. It doesn't announce itself. It just does the work. And I think about what my father would say if he could see all of it. Not the legal outcome, not the charges, not the judgment, just the image of his daughter, sitting in a notary's office at 9 in the morning, holding 3 documents that rewrote what she thought she knew about her family. I think he would be sad in a way that had no bottom, but I also think he would remind me of something he used to say, that a person's character is not what they claim in the good times, it's what they choose in the moments no one is supposed to be watching. My brother believed no one was watching. He was wrong. The house on Elgin Street is mine now. The mug is on the counter every morning, and I am learning, slowly, that the most important thing I can do with what happened is not to harden, not to become someone who trusts no one and questions everything out of fear. The lesson isn't suspicion. The lesson is attention. Pay attention to the people around you. Pay attention to the documents in front of you. Pay attention to the small voice that says something doesn't quite add up, even when everything looks fine on the surface. That voice is not paranoia. That voice is intelligence doing its job. My father saved for 30 years so that his work would mean something after he was gone. It does. I make sure of that every single day.